Our guest today is Suzanne O'Brien. Suzanne is a former hospice and oncology nurse, international speaker, and best-selling author. She's the founder and creator of the International Doula Givers Institute and the award-winning Doula Givers End-of-Life Trainings. In 2015, Suzanne was awarded Worldwide Leader in Healthcare by the International Nurses Association, and in 2019, she was named an Oprah Magazine Humanitarian Brand Ambassador. Suzanne has been at the forefront of the end-of-life doula movement in the United States since it began building momentum nearly a decade ago. She's developed a free training based on her experience working with over 1,000 end-of-life patients as a hospice nurse and palliative care professional. The Level 1 End-of-Life Doula and Family Caregiver training is a free course designed so that anyone and everyone can understand the basic end-of-life processes and how to offer comfort to families and patients throughout these transitions. You can find more information about her at doulagivers.com. Suzanne and I connect in that we encourage people to work with and embrace the uncomfortable truths in life, trauma and end of life, with support and care. As you'll soon see, she brings warmth, care, and deep love to her work, and we're so lucky to have her here with us today. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to the How We Can Heal podcast. My name is Lisa Danylchuk, and I created this podcast to share deep conversations that encourage us to move through life's toughest circumstances. Let's get talking about how we can heal.
Let's go.
Let's go. Man, I'm so happy to have you here. You look gorgeous. For those watching video, they'll know. And you just emanate so much love and peace and support. And so I'll take that in for the next hour or so, and hopefully others will as well. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And I have to say right back to you, this is such a positive, there's so many challenging things happening in the world right now, but there's so many good things happening as well. Sometimes I wish there was just a news network that was all about the kindness and compassion and positive things out there, because we don't hear those.
Yes.
But thank you for having this platform, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to be on it.
That's it. We need a news show that's like about how we can heal.
Why don't you create that? Okay. Yes.
And I think that's what this is now. That's
right. That's right.
So thank you just for all the work you've done and you continue to do. I want to talk a little bit. Let's start by exploring just you and how you came to this work. And then I really hope that, and I know that by the end of this, people are going to walk away with some tools, some places to go. People who are facing grief or the loss of a loved one, which, given the pandemic we've just been through, is all over the world and continues, right? This is a part of life that people don't talk about. So I'm curious, what led you to work with death and dying?
Thank you for asking that. And it's such an interesting thing because it really talks about finding your purpose in life, and how there's a space that calling is something that you have to trust in your heart, that it's not always going to be like making sense. Mm-hmm. So when I was younger, I became a nurse, and I remember being happy at being a nurse for sure. I loved the helping profession. I grew up in a medical family, but I always had this feeling, I'm like, there's more. I haven't really hit it yet. Like there was just an unease about it. And I kept hearing this inner voice at one point saying, go to hospice, go to hospice. And I was like, why am I hearing that? I have zero end of life experience, nothing.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't make sense at the time to change a nursing job that was with good hours and better pay and the whole thing, to go and take a hospice job, by the way, with no experience.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? I've tried to figure it out from this point, and I haven't really hit it. I haven't hit that daily, peaceful, whatever I know is available to us in this journey. I said, I'm just going to trust this. Let me just trust this. And it took me about 3 times to apply to hospice. And the very first day I went out to see patients, I knew I was in the exact place I was supposed to be in my life. And it was right there that like a piece of the puzzle fit in a way that is almost indescribable of connection. And I said at that moment, I'm never going to make another decision. I do think about things, by the way, but I said, I'm never going to make another decision in my life other than this knowing inside of me. How does my body feel? And I try and teach that to people because it's really the key to finding that. So that led me to hospice. And if you told me now that I would be doing something different, the Doula Givers Institute and working, I really probably wouldn't have believed you, because I was so very happy there. But I kept saying yes to the universe and what was put in front of me. And because, death is so very challenging right now in our world for most families, that there had to be a change. And so the change is teaching people how to care for loved ones, bringing back that skill
Yeah.
before we ever get there, but also talking about the sacred, beautiful experience that death used to be revered as, and bringing that back and showing you why.
I love so much of what you're
Mm,
saying right now, and I resonate personally with this, like, I don't know what's next, but I trust this, and this
yeah.
feels good, and this feels right, and it's in my bones, and it's in my heart, and it's in my body, and,
Yep.
there is sort of a struggle with the way the world's set up and the way we have our work week and our hours and our pay,
Mhm.
and it doesn't always exactly align with where your soul is being
Mhm.
called. But I do
Mhm.
feel like, you're such a beautiful example of following that and finding that way, and I think it's important too that we trust that
Mhm.
as we move forward in terms of collective healing, that more of us lean into that and trust that and figure it out,
Yes.
because that really leads us in a more sustainable and healing direction as a whole.
It really does. And I will talk about how I learned everything about life and how to live really fully by working with those at the end of life, right?
Mhm.
Because at the end of life, okay, so if I can break it down for us a little bit in clarity, there's four parts to us. So we're holistic beings: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And at the end of life, I'm sitting bedside with people where I literally see the physical body diminishing and the
Mm,
spiritual body growing. And there's a time in the journey that people get what I call their spiritual wisdom, their spiritual eyes, and they're able to look back on their life's journey with all of this insight and wisdom. They're able to forgive, they're able to make sense of things. And it's such a loving, graceful place that there's two directionals. And this is really what I wanted to break down about when I followed my knowing.
mm,
We have our mind, which are analytical, and that what I call the internal Google that we have. So it's going to be based on everything that's been inputted from our upbringing, from our schooling, from our culture. And that's where I feel like the chaos that we see out here is because everyone feels like they're right.
yeah.
Because if they're just going with their mind and their input, then the output is what's right for them, but it's only very small and one dimensional. And then you have your heart centered wisdom, highest consciousness. And that is always going to be tied to unconditional love, the collective of peace. And if you know the two are always directing, okay, and if we're not aware of it, 95% of the time, the unconscious ego mind, which is that mind, the small one, is directing the show. And that's what we see out here, is everyone in just this crazy state. And if you knew that, wait a minute, let me just sit quietly, let me go into my heart and see how this feels. If you follow that direction, we'd be in a much different place in
Mhm.
this world.
Yeah, and when you attune to that, it's beyond the right and wrong, the sort of
Yeah,
dichotomies that we get
that's
caught up in of
that's
I'm
right.
right about this or you're right about that, or we,
That's
get
right.
really wedged into our opinions, but there's something that's beyond that. And so what you're saying is at end of life, people sort of naturally, I mean, I'd
Mhm.
imagine you've
Yep.
seen such a variety at this point, but
Yes.
it sounds like people start to step into this state
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
wisdom and
Yeah.
compassion and knowing,
Yes.
and there's a sense of peace that you describe, and I know you and I have spoken before, after my brother passed, I had this experience of, like,
Yes.
going somewhere in a half dream state and getting it all. I was like, "Oh,
Yes. Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
okay," and I
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
understood, and in that moment, I could map it, I understood it, like, cognitively even, and then I
Right.
came back, I sort of drifted back to the left for whatever reason, and I was like, "Oh, I remember the feeling of it being
Yeah.
okay, and I remember the feeling of why, that I got
Yeah.
why, but now I don't get why anymore." And I was like,
I
"What?"
feel I feel like, Lisa, there's somewhere in you that does, and I really do feel that way. But I also want to share is that this has
Right.
been, and I've been so honored and privileged to work with over 1,000 people from all around the world in different capacities at the bedside and in different religions and cultures. It all comes down to this spirituality.
Yes.
And they literally will wake up from a sleep saying, "Oh, I get it now. We're
Yeah.
all connected. That was meant to happen. That trauma was it meant to happen in order for me to grow in my spiritual evolution." And it's like a major healing that happens before they actually get to that other side. Now, this is what I want to share with you is that we've removed end of life basically from our society. We don't see it, we don't talk about it, and it's leading to, just in the practical sense, deaths being 1,000 times more difficult. But I also will tell you this, it's the greatest teacher about how to live. Because if you heard from people what they want you to know about your time as your most valuable commodity, that it's all about unconditional love, that forgiving is the best thing you could possibly do to shift energy and to align with that higher frequency. Now, today,
Yes.
it's all available to us. It's a choice, and we want to share tools. And I feel like this is what we're doing today, is being able to share that.
And this makes me think of Chris's interview and, life is a terminal condition, and the
Yeah.
really popular hospice worker. Oh, now, of course, I'm forgetting her name. The top five regrets of the dying, Bronnie Ware.
Yes, and
Yeah.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and yeah, all of them are amazing. Yeah, yeah.
But there's this element of bring it forward. No, don't push it away. Because right now, you're
Befriend
right.
it.
People go to homes, people get sort of, shuffled into corners, and we don't really look at it. We don't connect with it. We do have some amount of ritual or ceremony, but usually after, right? After
Yeah,
someone.
and I don't even know that those are done as well as they could be.
Yeah. And so what do you think it would look like to bring death in?
If you befriend death, it's the best thing you could possibly do for your life. So for me, I grew up in a medical family. So as a young girl growing up, I heard my parents talking about illness and death and compassion with people going through it. So when I got into the medical world, and it was so dysfunctional with our elderly, because we have an elder care crisis right now,
Mhm.
I was wondering what happened. And then I saw people die alone in hospital rooms. And I thought, what's happening here? And I said, and then I the pull to go to hospice. And I said, it will be better there. I know it will be better there because that's our end of life provider. And it wasn't. People weren't talking about it. They still aren't. And I said, what happened here? So 100 years ago, death used to happen. First of all, our lifespan was much different. It was about 46. Now it's 81, and it's going to continue to grow, as they say,
Yes.
elongate. And death was more of a part of our natural life cycle. And so grandmothers used to hand down the skill of how to care for the dying to the grandchildren. People died in the home. The wakes were in the home. Somehow in this last 100 years, we've totally removed it. And I kind of call it the perfect storm. We've taught our doctors how to keep people alive, but keeping alive and living are two very different things.
Yes.
And we also don't see end of life. And somehow the fear of death became number one. And even the language we use, he lost his battle, keep fighting. I'm so sorry, there's no more I can do for you. This all points to this enemy. And let me ask you this, Lisa,
Mm-hmm.
where in our journey did we make death the enemy, the ultimate enemy? I think we have to start to change our perspective, because I have been so honored to be in end of lives, not many, by the way, but we're getting there, that have been so incredibly beautiful and
Mm-hmm.
loving and sacred. And you will never walk out of a room like that and look at life the same way, in
Right.
the best way possible.
Right.
So I think it's just, that kind of perfect storm of where we are now and what it looks like if we brought that back. I think we'd have, and we are going to have, the most loving, caring world, because it teaches you about presence and gratitude and compassion, and that we're all connected.
Yeah.
What more can you ask for?
It's like watching a birth, right?
It is. It
It's a
is.
transition. It's a
Yeah.
huge
Yeah.
transition.
Yeah.
But we associate joy with birth and we associate sadness with death. But when you
Yeah.
have the spiritual context like you're describing, that changes things.
That's right. Absolutely.
It's so interesting you bring up, where did we get so afraid of death? Because that makes me think straight to PTSD and the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. And it's really an experience like a threat of death that
Yeah.
often will initiate PTSD. So I think a lot about the biological will
hmm
to sort of stay alive. But
hmm
it is interesting because there's post-traumatic growth where people have a traumatic experience and they maybe have a lot of emotion. That might be grief, there might be all this reaction, but there's also a sense of opening. I definitely experienced that, a sense
Yeah.
of greater love.
Yes.
And then there's PTSD where something gets sort of hijacked, where we're looping in our brains and we're stuck on this fear.
Right.
And I know in a lot of spiritual traditions, they kind of go between love and fear as a definition, but just interesting because you asked me that question and I think, where did we get stuck on that? And there is this very deep biological imperative to stay alive. I mean, as far as I understand the body. Uh, but when you look at, well, who went to the post-traumatic growth and who's stuck in the PTSD, one way I would differentiate that is there's a fear of that death happening. There's a fear of that threat of harm too. That's very real, that's still alive, that's kind of circulating and amplifying in the body even. And then there's, the other side of it where people experience immeasurable loss. I have a dear friend who lost her daughter. You know, no one ever wants to feel, obviously my parents lost their son too, like we lose these dear people to us all the time and it's heart-wrenching, but you can see how some people in their grief have such an opening, I think is
Yes.
the best way I can describe it. Do you have a sense of like how or why someone might go one way or the other?
For sure. So what I gather right now, and this is, and I work with people, and it, last night, Sunday night, when I was, almost 10 o'clock, somebody posted something in our Facebook group, and my team was like, you need to jump in there and answer it. This is not uncommon that this is a crisis almost all of the time right now. And so what I'm finding is that we've removed it from even our awareness. And so when it shows up, and so I've been an oncology nurse and which is a cancer nurse, and I've been a hospice nurse.
Yeah.
And so I've worked and seen at the bedside where somebody comes in with cancer at 97 with it all over, and and the doctor says, this is where we are. And the family's like, fix it, do something. I know. And I've had calls from doctors say, you need to help us. The families are making us intubate people and keep them alive, and we know it's not, like, it's crazy out there. So I think one of the first things we want to do is bring back the truth about death, not what you saw in a show or not what you may have heard. And also, people have had scary relationships with as a child, like maybe being shielded from their grandmother, or letting somebody know that, I get this all the time, that I never got to see my dad again. They didn't even tell me he was sick, or they told me grandmother is sleeping or went on a vacation. Like, this sets us up with
Yeah,
trauma. And I think people are always trying to do the right thing. I always think that everyone is doing the best they can with what they've got.
sure.
But when you tell it, the biggest thing we could do that is a justice for children is bringing them back into the awareness, age appropriately, that death is a natural cycle of life, and not to be fearful of it, because it happens with animals, it happens with all of us. And so right now I'm dealing with a whole generation that was shielded and protected and removed death, and it doesn't work that way.
Mhm.
So I feel like that's one of the things, how we can heal this. And I find this from what I teach, is that if we let somebody come in safely into this loving space to learn it before we're faced with it, because that's key, and we can really share the stories and what that's like, all of a sudden, oh, I can take a breath into this. And not only that, but there's so much, like I said, inspiring information that people have shared at the bedside that I've been able to witness and be a part of, that will have you thinking, this life is so much different than I ever thought, in a beautiful way, in a
Mm,
beautiful way.
yeah. It just makes me think of all the really big feelings that come up with death, of love too, right? People say, "I can't go visit because I don't wanna feel the I don't wanna say goodbye, I don't wanna let go," but there's love and grief that just go hand in hand, right? So that just makes me think that this is also about how we deal with emotion, right? Like, how many people still, "Oh, don't cry. Oh, clean it up. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm crying." It's like, what about just letting those
Yes.
love and the tears and the everything move through us rather than trying to stifle it? It sounds like it would allow people to be in that space, to be with each other, to be with people as they're dying.
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt that it is so hard to say goodbye to that physical, beautiful person. But the thing is that I ask you this, is it's 100% guaranteed. I've never heard one person who said, "Oh, I outdid it. I was able to." And I want to also share this, is that the painful experiences that we talked about, that grief, that heaviness, those can be our greatest gifts for breaking open into a loving, again, higher place of living, because you've been through it, because you've suffered so, but then broke open, hopefully, to your heart being open, because if you can feel your loved one still there, if you can know that the honoring, and this is where the 3-day home wake is something that is really, really beautiful for people. And I'll do a whole piece on this because it's so important. There's something about 3 days when somebody dies, having us concretely see that person. But also for me, I feel like it's feeling that love that's still
Mm.
there. So yes, I see that that person is not breathing in that body, but I feel them and I honor them. And we do ritual, that there's something that is so incredibly powerful and healing about that ritual. And for me, I've had so many people end of life, and I feel them all over. So for families to feel that and have that ability, I think brings them into, again, a different space of, okay, I'm not going to be able to grab them and hold them and hug them, but boy, can I love them.
Yes. And I think a lot of people, well, I had this experience too of seeing, a body. I saw my brother and going, "He's not there. Like, there's his
He's
body,
not
but
there.
that's not him in the casket." Like,
I love that.
I'm saying goodbye to this container in a container, and I'm okay with that. I don't have a
Sure.
problem saying
Yeah.
goodbye to that, but then, and I have had these, sort of wild experiences of driving and turning by this really beautiful flowering bush and feeling like, "Wow, my brother's right there." Like,
Go
there
with that.
he is,
Go with that.
right?
I want to teach people that there is, okay, so let's use the example of like a radio frequency, right? So there's radio waves that are happening all the time that we can't see in our eye, but they're there. When you get that kind of a feeling, do not let your smaller mind negate it. Own it, love it, open that heart, because it's the truth. And just like if I took a pen right now and dropped it, gravity. So we don't teach these things that, again, are very much a part of this whole experience and could really create a lot of healing and inspiration, but we just don't talk about that or
It
teach it. Yet it's there. It's science.
Yes, it feels like this secret society of people who've experienced loss who say, "Oh, I had this dream. Oh, I had this experience. Let me just tell you about this." And I will freely share any of these examples I'm giving today with people I know and
Yeah.
love who are going through loss, but I don't typically bring them up with people who aren't experiencing that or haven't experienced that because they're just not in a place where that is resonating with them or where they've
Sure.
experienced it, or but still it ends up this sort of secret society. Well, it's tucked into the deep conversations when someone else is going through it. And so what I love about what you're doing is you're bringing all of this, like, why do we wait? And why do we wait until we're grieving or somebody's, in hospice? Why don't we centralize these conversations so that we can live better, so that we feel more connected, and so that we're not living in this sort of half conscious
Yeah.
tension or fear of pushing away something that's happening to
Natural.
everyone.
So let me share with you, if I may, when I was in hospice and the hospice model. So the hospice is a beautiful model of care, but as a hospice nurse, I was supposed to teach the loved ones how to care for their loved one at home at the end of life. I'm only there for an hour once a week. People come on the service very late, and then as a nurse, I'm there for a very limited time. The people in the family are petrified. You can't teach people there. I'm running in, putting band-aids on. So for me, I was like, okay, if I'm supposed to teach people how to care for their loved one, what about, I go, this isn't working, right? As much as I was riding around the town and doing extra hours, it still wasn't working. Okay. I said, why don't I develop a training from my experience about, from start to finish, how to care for your loved one in the 3 phases that I've identified of end of life, and offer it before you get there, like that
Mhm.
grandmother handing it down to a grandchild. And I
Yes.
went to my hospice team and they said, this is great, but we can't do it. I said, why? They said, because we won't get paid for it in the reimbursement model. So I said, well, I'll go teach it at the library for free. And this was about 18 years ago. And do you know what happened? Psh, it filled up.
Yep. Not surprised.
And right. And then all of a sudden, people from other countries were like, yeah, it's not going well here. And I was like, let me put it online. And Lisa, today, every month we do a training. It's 90 minutes in the training, and then I do a live Q&A. We go about 3 to 4 hours with questions. People from all over the world, between 2,500 and sometimes 5,000 people register for this training.
Yep.
People wait in the middle of the night. I said, I'll send you the replay. They want to be there live. How beautiful. And we talk about the same experiences, whether it's a dirt floor in Zimbabwe or it's a mansion in Millbrook. We are all the same. And we've got to bring that back. Not
Yep.
different, not different, the same. So the key was to teach people ahead of time, and then in the learn about life at the same moment.
Can you share those 3 phases?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. So when I was working with people, I would, again, I think time's never on our side at the end of life right now. And so when I go in, I'm trying to identify like where are they and meeting people where they are. So the first phase is the shock phase. And try and picture this. You get a terminal diagnosis, you maybe have had a journey with illness, but your doctor says this is where you are. And all of a sudden, like when you're told you don't have any more time or there's a finite amount of it, it's a shutdown. So usually it's a shock for not only that patient, but for the family as well.
Yes.
The second phase, if we're lucky enough to get one, and the more that we can get in there and help people with safety and love and acute issues, is the stabilization phase. And that to me is where the magic happens. It's also what I call the work phase. What does that mean? What end of life work can somebody do? A lot. So this is where we actually, this is our moment. This is our window of opportunity that we look, because we push things away and we kind of try and forget things. And guess what?
Sweep it under the rug.
Oh, we try that ball. We keep trying to, push under the water. It doesn't work. And this is the opportunity for us to find peace within that, give forgiveness, make sense of things in our life. Now, there's an organic, beautiful thing that supports this is because as that physical body is declining, there is yet heart center that's getting larger and larger. And all of a sudden people, oh my gosh. Now I want to share a quick story. I was training a certified doula giver, and she said she had an estranged relationship with her father. She got a call from an aunt who said, your father's dying. They were in a different country. He wants to see you. And she was like, I don't think I want to go. She said, well, okay, I'm going to go. She walked into the hospital room. She walks through the door and he's like, I'm sorry. I forgive you. Please forgive me. He's like, he was all about love. He was all about this
Mm.
forgiveness. He's like, everything made sense. She goes, I was so glad I went.
Yeah.
But this is really critically important, this space, because there's not one of us that does not have forgiveness to give or forgiveness to receive. And again, I want your listeners to please take this away today, is that you can use forgiveness now and it can change your life. And then the third phase is the transition phase. And, very much similar to that birthing of the baby, it can be very quick. It can be painful. There's a lot to it. And that we're saying goodbye to that person. So the more prepared you are and can anticipate the needs, even knowing the natural way that the body systematically shuts down, it can change your whole experience by being there to support somebody at end of life.
Yeah. So it's the shock, the
The
work,
stable, the
the emotional.
stabilization.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the shock phase, the stabilization phase, and the transition.
Okay. And in that stabilization is when there's an opportunity for real healing and reconnection and forgiveness and all of these things. I'm just curious, do you ever see people who don't go through it, a spiritual
Yep.
opening, who seem to sort of close down more, or does that ever
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah. So one of the things that I want to share with people is that this is not about my agenda as a doula giver, or it shouldn't be anyone's agenda. When we show up for somebody at the end of life, it should be purely to be of the highest service with no judgment, and it's about their journey.
Yes.
So we have to honor however their journey is, it's perfect. And is it always like the way that we would hope? No, but it's not about us. So yes, I have. So, we've seen people who have had heavy trauma sometimes. Like veterans have been some of my most challenging end of lives.
Yeah.
They're just so loving and they've been through so very much. And what I would say to families in those moments when you're caring for somebody is that you're not always going to have a spiritual breakthrough, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I also say this, it might not be always shared with you, because we're going to talk a little bit later about visitations at the bedside, which are phenomenal.
Mm.
But they may not share it with you, but they also may not actually have one. And what you can do is look for those practical, acute issues that need to be rectified. Pain, just sitting and showering with love, doing what you can practically. And it's about the person's journey and just honoring that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is important because I do know people personally who have had, spiritual experiences maybe leading up to death, but then the final days are very fraught. So I think it's important to talk about that piece too. And every experience is going to be unique, obviously. But if you're hearing, oh, there's all this grace and love and beauty that happens, well, that can happen in a lot of different ways. And there's
Yeah.
also sometimes this very raw, challenging, even struggle that people go through.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So the stabilization again is that window that's really conducive for a lot of that spirituality and beautiful things. When we get to the body actually shutting down, there is going to be stuff that goes on. And so I want to give you tools in this training is to like, okay, this is what's happening. This is what you can do for comfort. There's a part that I believe, again, if we go back to a certain time in the journey where people have one foot in this world and one foot in the next, and they're sleeping a lot, there is a restlessness. There can be a confusion. There can be a struggle. They're not quite ready. And it can be like, look like a lot. Then at the end of life, as the body's shutting down, there's going to be different breathing changes. There's going to be different things, and it can look uncomfortable. One of the things that can look uncomfortable is because we've never seen it before. When
Yeah.
we understand the physiology, when I share with people what is happening and why that's happening, and that the person's really not experiencing that, and then what we can do for comfort, it really brings about, okay, this is a natural process. The body knows what to do. We've been dying for thousands of years. And so for me, I thought, where did we ever get to this point? And also, as a medical professional, sometimes when we step in and start tweaking and turning and doing things, we can really kind of muck up the natural flow of an end of life. And this is not for anyone to decide but me what I would want. But if we don't decide, it goes into that default, and that can be a very different road. So I
Yeah.
just want to make that clear.
So that's like when we look at something, then we can think about it,
Yeah,
make a
of
plan.
course.
But if
Yes.
we're just sort of pushing it off and saying, "Oh, well, that's not gonna happen to me," well, heads up, it is.
Heads up, it is, because that's 100, and it does not have to be a terrible thing at all. So for me, 80 to 90%, I've seen positive end of life, 80 to 90%, no matter what the disease process has been, with two things. Number one, doing your advanced care planning, doing your advanced directive, and thinking about where I'd want to be and what's quality of life and when I would want to extend it, and when it's time that I just want to be kept comfortable. And number two, learning again the basic skills of what it's like to care for somebody at end of life. So then you have this idea. And the people who have done those two things, 80 to 90%, because it was more like, okay, I know one day this is going to come. It makes me live today with a very different set of appreciation and awareness. And then when it does come, okay, and I have my plan 80 to 90% better. And that's really what my platform and why so much free training is given, because we can't go back and do this again.
Yeah. And talk about it and think about it beforehand. I was just talking to my dear friend's husband about he lost his mother, and he's talked about how it just starts happening so fast, and all of a
Yeah,
sudden there's this hospice and this plan, and she's very medicated, and they're going, "Wait, we don't know. Was that the right decision?" Because it all just sort of snowballed in that direction over the course of a few days, and loved ones are trying to do their best. They're flying in from different
absolutely.
places,
Yeah.
showing up, trying to get more information, figure out what's happening. They're getting maybe even mixed messages from different healthcare professionals. And so to make those decisions as a support person, or obviously, the person themselves can't make it in that moment, it without some sort of directive, that becomes this extra question, doubt, stressor.
It should never be left for your family to decide. One of the greatest gifts we can give our families is to do our advanced directive. Not only do them, but have a family meeting. I always say with a lasagna or brownies or whatever you want, and share with them why you're choosing what you're choosing. Because even if they don't agree, and I know it's so hard, like if I say I don't want a feeding tube if I can't recognize you, if I can't talk to you, that's not how I want to be kept alive, because I love you so much and that would be awful for me. Even if they don't agree with that, they've heard me share that. So
Yes.
the most loving thing they could do is say, and it's not, the onus is not on them. They're not
Yes.
like, well, I have to decide yes or no. No, she decided and she was very clear. It makes it so much better. So you can't do this at the end, and it's not fair. And I just want to say a little thing about the hospice and the end of life and the medications. This is what I see happening a lot. People are coming on end of life services so late because we're avoiding it, that I get people on doula giver services when they're in their actively dying phase. And I think hospice does a lot too. So when they are finally called in, that person is so advanced in their process
Yeah.
that then there is required some medication just to help that cocoon leaving on the outside. And people are sometimes like, well, hospice came in and the medication, and then it's because a lot of the time this very late process. So the more empowered we can be by sharing and learning ahead of time, the better we will be on all fronts.
Absolutely. It gives that comfort, right? I mean, one of the things I think of a lot in your work is there's comfort when we talk about hospice, we think of the comfort of the person who's dying, but there's also the comfort and support of the people who are flying across the country and just got a last minute notice and are trying to figure out what to do. And I feel like your work helps both, but especially starts this conversation around how do I be a support person, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just working with a family, and it was a younger woman in her, I want to say her early 50s, her best friend, and her went down, and I was guiding them through the teledoula, which is wonderful. And then I get this text, and she says, she's sleeping a lot, which lets me know that we're getting closer. She's calling for me. They're telling me that she's calling my name. Should I go?
Mm,
And I said, "You will never regret going. You will never regret the choice of going." She jumped on a plane. I go, tell them to tell her, who was basically sleeping most of the time, that you're on your way. Because if she wants to hold on for you, she will. And she jumped on a plane and she went down to Florida, and she walked through the room within a few hours. And she said it was the best decision that she ever made. And it was absolutely beautiful. So
yeah.
there's so much support and learning that we can give for caregivers,
Yes.
for the people accompanying this, that is again going to be the starting point or a big jumping off point for their grief and bereavement journey.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
we've got to get this right. Yeah.
I feel like you've probably gotten this question before because I know people who have, for whatever reason, whatever explanation, not gone, right? Maybe they have kids.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
and one of the reasons recently I've heard is COVID. I can't. I can't go. So I'm wondering how you support people who couldn't be there,
Yeah.
who wanted to, or maybe they were conflicted and COVID was the deciding factor, but I'm sure this question has come up for you. What supports do you offer, or what message would you send someone who couldn't be there?
Great. So two things here. People who just, like, let's leave COVID to the side for a minute. People who just can't go there for whatever reason. I just don't want to go. Please, no one judge them. And please
Yeah.
don't judge yourself,
Yeah.
because that is absolutely fine. It really is. You just have to get to that space. And then I want to share the three reasons why people actually won't have their end of life, and this is going to lead into that as well. But there is no judgment. If you don't feel like that's right for you, don't force people, and please, families, don't judge other people. What I will say is that, would that person like to write a letter that can be read to the person? Because maybe
Mhm.
it's too much to see the person. There's different ways that we can kind of create that loving space. But again, there's no judgment here. Let's talk about COVID. In 2020, I'm going to get emotional, so bear with me. I think it's just an emotional time in our world. And again, there's emotion is a very good thing.
Bring it.
In 20 in 2020, I was in Denver at the Oprah tour, and the world was shutting down, and I was living in New York City at the moment. And you were hearing about COVID, and it was literally shutting down. And I remember just two goals that I had: get home and get my dog out of daycare. And I
Yeah.
got home the night before my city shut down. I work in end of life, doula givers and end of life provider. We were so busy before COVID. Once COVID hit, it was like you've never seen. I
I
put a
imagine.
so and families were calling, medical professionals were calling, and doulas were calling and saying, "How do we work with families? We can't go in there." So I was like, "Okay, what are we going to do?" So I put up a life cafe 3 times a week for community to meet. But we created Teledoula, this huge platform where you can help families with being there without having to be there. We could teledoula the coaching of the caregiver with technology, because we're not going to risk this. Safety is one thing we can't risk, but also then how do you memorialize? How do you help families find closure when so many said, "I dropped off my husband at the hospital, I never saw him again"?
Yes.
So people feel, and rightly so, first of all, the whole world was turned upside down, but their personal life was turned upside down. So one of the things that we did with vigils and with the bedside is be able to set up ways that you could have, like, the camera be live streaming. So you could have family members come in, say what they need to say. We would have, like, somebody have as the point person, letting everyone know what was happening, bringing in, opportunities, because hearing's the last of the senses to go, for people to be able to share, and then doing memorials online. Now, here's the thing that I want to say is so beautiful and absurd at the same time. COVID made us all sit quietly at home, and that's not a bad thing. but
Right.
it also taught us that we could connect really beautifully through technology.
Yes.
So I'm an in-person person, but the thing is that let's utilize this. I am connecting with people all over the world. We had memorials going and services going on Zoom that more people attended, and I feel like this because they didn't have to travel, because they were in the comfort of their own home. There was so much love that was brought up there. And so we really want to create new ways of
Mm.
ritual and of being able to do this. Now, telemedicine has been found to be so effective in all fronts that it's here to stay, for better or for worse, and that's okay. You can still have in person, but it's a really beautiful thing because there was more of a need than ever to show up for people at the end of life, and yet we couldn't. So did we just say, okay, because we can't go in there, that we're just going to wait? Absolutely. We had to figure out a way to do that, and we did
Yeah.
it. We
Yeah.
did it. So you have to get creative, and thank you, technology, for that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
attended a Zoom funeral yesterday, 2 days ago, for a family member that I wasn't super close to, and I probably wouldn't have traveled to be there, but it was in the same place where my grandparents' funeral had been, and then I heard stories about her, and, "Oh, now I wanna know more," to your point, I think that the death brings up, "Oh, why didn't I know this person better?" And
yeah.
right? Like, there's all these other questions that come with that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I find really important is that, like, I will text literally that person is actively dying, and I'll be able to text with the caregiver, like, through the whole thing without disrupting that sacred space.
Yeah.
So, because not everyone is at the same place, usually not in that. So they're like, okay, this is what's happening. Okay, did you try this? Or this is probably what's happening. May I share the 3 reasons why people do not have an end of life?
Please.
Um, all right. We're getting into the beautiful, fascinating part of end of life a little bit here. When somebody typically, end of life will work like this. When they're headed into their transition phase, there's usually these cues that will let us know that I think they're getting ready for transition. What we have found is that because symptom management is such a beautiful part of this, that we get the quality of their life so high, sometimes better than it has been in 30 years, that sometimes people forget that they're end of life because all of a sudden forgiveness and their symptoms are managed and there's like so much love. We never want it to be completely forgotten. But I look for 2 indicators that they're heading into their transition phase. And one is that they will not have the ability or desire to eat, which is a very intense one for families. So we really want to know what's happening. But what typically happens is they go into transition phase within a few hours to days, they go into their deep sleep coma.
Yeah.
From in the deep sleep coma, hours to days, the body usually dies. Typically, now we have, and I know there's a lot more for me to see. I have seen many different things. There's 3 reasons why people will actually hang on. One is that they're waiting for someone to come. Okay,
Yes.
so now picture that they're in a sleep coma, not talking, with their eyes closed for days, waiting for someone to come. Number 2, they're waiting for something to be resolved, for a date of some sort, or for somebody to, again, maybe give forgiveness, which you can still give. So something is not complete yet. And number 3 is they're waiting for you to actually leave the bedside. And this is so counterintuitive
Yes.
that step away from, they don't want that to be the last thing that you have seen because they know how hard this is. So I have to say this, how do they know that the 5 minutes that you stepped out of the room to get a cup of coffee, that they decided to have their end of life, what is that saying in this much bigger picture? It was a
Mhm.
gift to you. I'm being told that it's a gift to you, and it changes the whole perspective of all of this. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I heard a lot of people say, "Oh, I rushed to get there," or "I went to step out to get a cup of coffee," and that's the moment, and then they are in this place of shame or blame or
Guilt, yes.
that they didn't listen to their intuition, somehow they missed it, and then I'm always reminding, like, there's another perspective here. Here's this person who's also, to some degree, I think, choosing their moment.
Absolutely.
And just like
Thousand
sometimes we don't
percent.
want someone watching us go to the bathroom, maybe we don't want I don't know. I don't know how I'll feel, but maybe people need privacy, or maybe it is too hard to
It's too
do that
hard.
when someone's right there. And so to think about that perspective and that, to frame it as this choice, I think it takes the onus off that person who's thinking, "I was supposed to be there, and I was supposed to be holding their hand," and they have this vision in their mind. And I was thinking when you were talking about my grandma who passed at almost 105,
Oh,
early COVID, April 2020, we
mm.
called her, I spoke through the phone to her, she was kinda seemed like she was going in that direction. It ended up happening over the night after we talked to her and after all these things, but So many friends I spoke with were like, "Oh, she saw what was happening. Her birthday was like a month away. We always fly out for her birthday." And she was like, "You know what? I'm good. Like, I'm gonna go now because there's a pandemic. It's
Yeah.
changing.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah.
Love you. See you later." And so even though she's not verbalizing those things, and I would have loved to have been there holding her hand, I don't know that she would have wanted that. And definitely
No.
in the context of what was happening, it sort of made this larger sense. And I know we all kind of tell our stories and figure out each experience on our own, but it
Yeah.
was just really interesting, it fit in so many of the things you're saying of like, people sometimes just like it's their pace. It's not always what we want as loved ones.
Well, yeah, and but there's a like so much more here for me. So that's the truth, but then what is that saying? This person has been in a sleep coma and this happens all the time. I see at the hospital all the time. So this is the other thing. One of those indicators that somebody's going into a transition phase is that they talk about being visited by loved ones who've already died.
Yes.
So I want you to hear this, and I really want to share this, is that in my belief system is that we never die alone, ever. So if you go back to the frequency, that the physical body and that this body, the spiritual body, is that there's that some point that they are able to access and they're able to see loved ones. Now, I've literally had people that have had that experience where they're like, see you later. They're so ready to go then because they've now seen their mother. They've been in that loving, beautiful, what they describe that's indescribable, but they're worried about you
Mm,
being here. So they don't want that to be ingrained in you that last moment because they know it's too hard. And so they orchestrate when they're going to go. But what is that saying about much bigger picture here? Really beautiful. Really
yeah.
beautiful.
So where do we all go from here, right? We've just had this massive experience of global loss. You have all this wisdom and experience from really taking this thing that, and again, avoidance is a trauma thing, a PTSD term too, but we've avoided, right? We've been
Yeah.
like, "La, la, la,
Yeah.
la, la, I don't wanna
Yeah.
go
Not
there."
going to happen. Yep.
And now we've been, like you said, it's not a bad thing to sit and be at home either. We've been sitting and being at home and dealing with this more in our face, for most people at least, and a very collective experience of just massive grief and loss. I mean, I heard someone saying recently, maybe it was Chris, talking about that people are lobbying for, even in the United States, like a department of bereavement, a department of death and dying. Like we need to be addressing this. So with all of your wisdom and experience, where do you think we go from here? How do we bring this in?
So, what I have found with the work that I've been doing that is so powerful is that death will teach us how much more similar we are than different. And when we bring that back into our space and we listen to those at the end of life and understand the holistic beings in this journey that we are, and we go into that heart and we start connecting with one another with that compassion, with that grace, because Lisa, how much money you have or how many degrees you have, when your end of life comes, doesn't matter.
Don't care.
It's not going to help either. Don't care and it's not going to help. So why not learn about how precious today is and how you are part of me, because that is what they talk about, this unconditional connected way that we're all part of one. And then I'm going to do everything I can to show up in presence and compassion and kindness and make the world a better place. If we bring that teaching back in, we could change this world. And if we can understand the holistic beings that we are, and for me personally, I feel like this is the really hard part. This life journey, this soul growth is challenging and it's super hard. And if we look at it in that way, that we're here experiencing things so we can break open, like you began this beautiful podcast with the heaviness of pain and suffering, breaking us open to a higher level of love and evolution of our own soul. If we can bring back the teaching of that and get together and follow that, oh, the ego's telling me to not like, hold on, let me check. Let me go into this heart here. Let me see the truth in that. Oh no. Yeah. I love you. Let's like meet in that moment. We can change this world. We could change this world. And I think it's happening. I think it's starting.
It makes me think of, with clients, many times I've used let's use the deathbed test on this. Like,
Okay.
how important is this person to you? How
Yeah.
important is
Yeah.
this circumstance? And it does have a way of just reorienting when we think of being on our own deathbed or we think of losing someone we love, all of a sudden, like, okay, I can forgive that. Okay, that the
Yeah.
context shifts a little bit. So this interconnectedness you're speaking of, right? If we're embodying that day to day, moment to moment, we're less likely to get caught in some of the mental back and forth that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and today I was walking my dog and I was thinking, I mean, obviously we're going through such heavy times all the time. And I was saying if we could live each day like one lifetime, like its own lifetime,
Mhm.
with what's important to us in this day. And then tomorrow, ooh, it's a gift. I got another day. Like really have that awareness. But what's important to me today? Finding joy, connecting, being kind, breaking it down. Then when the day does come, I'll be in a much better place because we just don't know when that's going to be. And
Yeah.
so I feel like the priorities that we've been told are important are not, and that we have to switch that thinking to fulfillment and connection rather than achievement and goal.
And there's this really beautiful balance in what you teach between planning and thinking ahead and being in the moment,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
love that about it. It's like, yeah, think about it, look at it, don't hide it away, do your advanced directives, have a family meeting, have a lasagna over it, talk about it.
That's it. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
there's like and use that to fuel how you express yourself, how you feel, what's going on in your day to day. So there's this very present moment orientation with the we're not
Yes.
gonna ignore, we're gonna bring in the truth.
So if I get with you and we're saying, okay, we're gonna acknowledge, we're gonna say, okay, one day I'm gonna accept one day that end of life will be a part of my journey. Whether you are consciously thinking about it or not, you live your day with a very different lens because you know that, wait, one day I'm not going to be able to. So you don't sweat the small stuff. It's just like it's a wonderful gift in how we live. I just want to share one story, if I may, about a woman who came into the oncology unit. She was 47 years old and she came in on, I was working Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and she came in on a Friday. She had fractured her hip because she was on chemotherapy, which brittles your bones. And she had gallbladder cancer. So she came in, it was with her sister, and it was, they were very, very upset and scared, and you can understand. On Saturday, at the end of my shift on Saturday, I just did a turn and pivot from the commode back to bed with her, and she was out of breath. And that was a new finding. And just like, we just sat there, and I was like, I'll call her Mary. Mary, I said, do you want oxygen? What? No. And we just took this moment in, but we knew it was not, something was going on. The next day when I came in on Sunday, they told me that that night she was breathing heavy and they did tests and she had a pulmonary emboli, so blood clot in her lung. That's not a good thing.
Yeah.
One of the first things she said is, Suzanne's going to be very mad about this. So she knew how much I loved her, and I did. But that night, that Sunday night, the doctor came in that afternoon to do rounds, and I had a habit of walking into the rooms with them. When we walked into this girl's room, she said to the doctor, I just want to thank you for everything you've done for me. And I turned to the doctor and tears were going down her face. So Mary was telling the doctor that she was going to die. And it was before anyone called it. And they said that night at about 11 o'clock, Mary woke up from a nap and said, get my sister. I'm transitioning, with all the excitement that you would have told an 8-year-old child you're going to Disney World.
Wow.
And they got the sister from the lounge. She came and she goes, I'm transitioning. And she went into a deep sleep, and about 1 o'clock, she went into a deep sleep. And that night, about 4 a.m., she died. But I have to ask you this: what did Mary see in that sleep that made her so excited, so at peace? And yes, that is what we see at the end of life with so many. And if we could know that it could be like that, would we ever be afraid of it?
Mm, mm. I used to read these, spiritual books. It was Emmanuel's book. I'm not sure if you're familiar, on my shelf somewhere here. And one of the things that's resonated with me for so long is they said, "Death is like taking off a tight shoe."
Oh, I like that one.
I was like, "Sign me up." I mean, you and I have probably I don't wear heels anymore, but we've probably both stepped out of some heels after a long day of wearing them.
Child, yes. So
You
you're right.
know?
I
It's
love
like,
that. And then
"Oh,
yeah,
thank sweet
right.
baby Jesus."
But I really do call this the school of life because I know that it's full of so much pain and trauma and experiences, and I feel like that's all what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
In order for us to, I'm not saying it's easy at all, but I'm also saying that, and I want people to know this, that when we look at each other and when we pass each other, never assume that you know somebody's journey. meet each other with as much presence and grace that you could ever, because we just don't know that person. And I'm sure that everyone has had a very, very, everyone has had parts of suffering that you just don't know about. So let's just, again, give that grace to each other, because it's what's needed and it's what's changing. So if I look at my life like these, the school of life, and it's, these opportunities are helping me get to a different place, I kind of take the anger out of some of those experiences and look at it like in a different way. Just like my beautiful patients at the end of life with their spiritual eyes say, "Oh, I understand why that happened. Now I'm not angry. I have that closure, and it was a gift to get me to a higher place." What a different perspective, but let's take off the shoe. I like that. But we have to do our work here. That's why we're here.
Right. And let's go to Disneyland. I mean, that story you just told is even beyond, I mean, beyond taking off a shoe. That's like there's some serious excitement this person was sharing. And
Right? So we don't want to rush it. But
yeah,
we also don't want to fear it at all. Use it as
no,
your greatest tool to live fully.
yeah, it's such a, people have been talking about unprecedented times and the unknown and living with uncertainty. And I feel like it's the ultimate unknown and uncertainty. And so what we've learned from the past few years of being with not knowing applies here too. And what I love about your framework and your approach and the spirituality you're sharing is there's just so much comfort and ease. And, it takes that edge off of, what if it's really awful? And you're like, what if it's really beautiful? And I just wrote down, I'm actually going to pull off this little sticky note. Somebody said when I was another person who started a podcast, and I was in this little group of people who are starting a podcast, what's the best possible outcome? Like, we get so caught up in the worst ones. And I think with uncertainty, we can go to anxiety and fear and try to plan for every last,
That's the
possibility.
ego mind, right?
Power. Yeah, like, let me plan 10,000 things. And then it's like the 10,001st thing that happens, right? Like, we make all these plans, and then
Yeah.
the thing that happens is something we didn't account for. And a lot of times we're planning to try to prevent something negative. But what about if something good's going to happen? And so I love that you're bringing in, let's talk about end of life. Let's talk about the people who are supporting people dying. Let's talk about the death process. Let's bring that into our life. And then let's also leave room for, what's the best possible outcome? What if you're actually excited when you get to this transition? What if it's enriching for your life and your relationships? And you're bringing that from not just a what if, but from your experience. So
Yeah,
I
and
so
I love that. And I love that when I would travel to different countries and do the trainings, so many of the same stories were there of these just beautiful bedside epiphanies. Death used to be a sacred, revered as a sacred rite of passage. Let's bring that back. Let's
yes.
share that again, because it really is. I have literally had beautiful tears glistening of the love and the awe of that room. And I just want to share a man who was at the end of life with one of our doulas. He had his whole family around him. He was transitioning in his bed. He sat up at the very end, and he said, he looked around and he said, "I never knew how many angels I had around me." And whether you believe that or not, and I will tell you 1,000,000,000%, I am so certain, so certain that there is so much beauty on the other side, and we can bring this beauty into our life here. But whether you believe that or not, what a gift to that family,
Yes.
seeing that person at peace. But I do hope that you expand your mind and your heart and just let that sink in for a minute.
And just to think that there is love available to us
Yes,
somewhere out there somehow, however that fits into your belief system.
that's
Like,
right.
it's such a shift, right? To just think, I'm afraid, well, where's their love available to me right now? And often when we ask that question, we find it, right? Whether it's
That's
in a
right.
pet or in nature or in a person or in a thought that drops into our mind, right? It's there. Uh,
It's always there. That frequency is always there. It's for us to be able to set our dial and that radio that we are to tune into it, to allow it to come in, but it's always available.
Suzanne, I love you so much, and I'm so glad to have you here. Can we talk about your book? Is it Tough
Yeah.
Secret? Can you share, what you're working on, your working title if you want?
Well, thank you so much, and I adore you as well. So you probably know by now, this is my life's passion and my work.
Yes.
This is my purpose why I'm here. And we've done so much free training with the level one that I wanted to now put it into a book form, put these stories in, put what I've learned. And so it is called The Good Death. That is the working title. So let's hope that it is, because again, it can be an amazing end of life experience if we have the tools and the kindness and education. And it's going to have so much about where we got to this place, because I think it's very helpful to understand how the heck did we get here.
Yeah.
If we know where we were to where we are now, it can help us to where we want to go. And for me, death is the number one fear in the world right now. But I have to tell you honestly that with the patients that I've worked with, and I've worked with over 1,000 at the bedside right now, I don't think it was the fear of the death itself necessarily, but I think it was the fear that my time was up and I did not live my purpose. I
Yeah.
did not have the bravery. So I really want people to take that away. So it has just so many different facets. It has a whole chapter on forgiveness. It has a chapter, I shouldn't give the whole thing away, but that's it, but it's all good.
Give it all. Give it all.
Let's just do it. Dying to be green. There's a chapter called Dying to be Green about how our choices impact our world. And so
Yeah.
for one of the things, and there's no judgment here, but what I found with my family is that if we don't even talk about this area, we don't know that we have choices. And
Right.
one of them is, do you want to have a natural burial or a green burial? Or now there's this big water cremation, and they're really environmentally friendly. So for me, embalming, most people are under the impression that by law you need to have embalming done, and you don't. And again, there's no right or wrong or judgment here. But
Right.
when we share choices, it empowers us.
Yes.
And when I know that I can have an impact after I'm not here alive on the planet, that might be something I want to look into. And home wakes and writing my eulogy in first person. I know that might sound odd, but I have to share with you that I will probably say things that I want people to know that maybe somebody else wouldn't think about. And I want to also share this. I have never felt more of a power of love than, just like we talked about love, being in a memorial service and having somebody read a eulogy in first person.
Wow.
That and to my son, Nicholas, I want you to know that, like, I'm right there. It is
Wow.
so, yeah. So death, I always say death is having a rebirth, and we're bringing it back on so many different facets. But I think one of the most important things that I want to bring back is how connected we are and how similar we are. And let's get back to that kind of presence and compassion, because nobody needs to be elected, a law, or anything to be able to choose that.
Right.
So I want the best for you wherever you are in the world. And even if you're not doing things that we look at that are nice, I'm still going to send you love, because you must be extremely, I want to be careful with my words, extremely challenged on your path.
Suffering.
Yeah. Because if I'm angry and I know it's challenging at times, that's going to create more of that kind of energy. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in it, but I'm going to send you love. I'm going to bless you and allow you to go. And I'm going to focus on what I can contribute and put
Yeah.
that positivity out here. But there's just so much that we can learn from this space.
Yeah, absolutely, and I can't wait to read your book. I hope you do an audiobook too.
I
I just
will. I
Yeah,
will.
because
I will.
I love
For
your
sure.
voice, and I'd just love to listen
Oh,
to all of it too, and
thank
just go
you.
for a walk out in nature and just take it in. I mean, this is something that just through knowing you, I feel, with my own experiences with loss, that's impacted my life in a big way, but it also makes me think about, "Oh, wait, me too." Like, what about my death? What about the people I love? And let's bring that conversation in. So I so appreciate you bringing that up, bringing that
Yeah.
in, speaking your truth, and training people in all these beautiful ways.
Thank you. And I want to say one of the most fascinating things that surprised me within talking about this section is how much this has healed people.
Yeah.
You're about healing. And when we talk about the truth in the space and the beauty and just what it looks like, so many people have written in and said, you just helped me heal my parents' passing from 9 years ago, from 35 years ago. I want to thank you. We need to heal. We need to bring in our presence and our healing. So I think that the topic and the book have three things. It is, again, empowerment about the tools. It is about healing, and it's about inspiration about our life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And what I hear in that too is death as a teacher, right? And letting
Our
it
greatest teacher. Our greatest
teach
teacher.
us.
Flow. I would say, and remember, I always try and say we're humans doing, not humans being right now. And
Yep.
don't push flow and really allow your heart to be open and just set that kind of dial high in that frequency and see what comes in for you. And let's get back to that, because when we can start to shift that, you start to look through life with a different lens, and that lens is really beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for
Thank
sharing all of your
you.
experience and wisdom and love with us. It's such an important topic, and I think we'll only benefit from looking at it, right? Talking about it, inviting it in, and we have this global opportunity to do so, and I know so many people who need these conversations right now, who are digging for them, who are looking for them, going, "Who is talking about this? Because I wasn't thinking about talking about it, and all of a sudden I really need to think and talk about it."
Yeah,
And so I hope this just, exponentially gives us an opportunity to invite the experience of death in, talk about it, bring it in so that we can support each other and we can live life well.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thanks for being on the show, Suzanne. Maybe you'll come back when your
I
book's
would
ready.
love to. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay.
Thanks so much for listening. My hope is that you walk away from these episodes feeling supported and like you have a place to come to find the hope and inspiration you need to take your next small step forward. I do want to make sure it's clear that this podcast isn't offering any prescriptions. It's not advice or any kind of diagnosis. Your decisions are in your hands, and we encourage you to consult with any relevant healthcare professionals you may need to support you through your unique path of healing. For more information and resources, please visit my website, howwecanheal.com. There, you'll find tons of helpful resources and the full transcript of each show. You can also click the podcast menu to submit requests for upcoming topics and guests. Before we wrap, I want to send thanks to our guests today, to Christine O'Donnell and Celine Baumgartner of Bright-Sided Podcasting, and to everyone who helped support this podcast, directly and indirectly. Alex, thanks for taking the dogs out while I record. I'd also like to give a shout out to my brother Matt. He passed away in 2002. He wrote this music and recorded it, and it makes my heart so happy to share it with you now.